Welcome to the AICPA Town Hall Series, your resource for the latest news and updates on pressing issues facing the accounting profession.
Good afternoon and welcome to the AICPA Town Hall. It's great to be back with you live this week. We've got a great show. I'm Eric Ausgerson, one of your hosts, so let's get right into it. We're going to kick off things with a wide-ranging opening discussion with Barry Malonson, talking about what's happening in D.C., as well as some of the broader economic activities. We're then going to have a session that Tom Hood's going to lead with one of the leading CFOs in America, Jen Riley from TIAA, and he'll talk about, how she's leading the organization and thinking differently in this post-pandemic era. And then with Carrie Hispack, we'll kind of unpack the latest related to business relief and ERC. And then we'll close with open forum. Here's the lineup of presenters, and as they join, we will introduce them. And I'd like to kick it off by introducing Barry Malonson. So Barry, come on up, and it's great to have you here with us this week.
It's great to be here, Eric. No shortage of things continuing to happen. So I'm glad to have all the members in attendance and look forward to the discussion.
Yes, and what we do every week is, it's been a busy past couple of weeks. We've been talking to many government officials, to the firms, to our ecosystem, and what we try to do is bring the latest information. In the news, there's a lot happening. We even have some news that broke today, Barry, about the Supreme Court ruling on the ACA Act, a 7-2 ruling to keep that intact. So we'll be talking a little bit about that. Also, this IRS leak that we definitely have some concerns around that occurred a couple of weeks ago. A lot of talk about that in DC. And then there's still, business relief in the news. Here's a New York Times article about the Restaurant Revitalization Fund program and how a judge halted relief grants. And we'll be talking about that with Carrie. But Barry, let's just kick things off and talk about what's happening in DC. And first, this is on a lot of people's minds, what happened with this taxpayer data leak.
Well, our system, and those of you who've been on the town halls, you've heard me talk about it as it relates to IRS service levels, that our system is fundamentally a voluntary compliance system. Yes, it has some compliance aspects to it, but it's fundamentally the faith of the American public in the system that really makes our tax system work. And this is a very unfortunate outcome, the leak of for whatever reason. And some people get obviously very concerned about whether or not the IRS in some form or fashion is being used for political purposes. And it's a very, very serious issue. And as the CPA profession, of course, confidentiality is one of the hallmarks of our profession, and one that we, believe in just emphatically in. And as a result, that I think really puts a damper on some of the things from an IRS perspective. And it really actually also ties into the IRS service level issue, Eric, from the standpoint that if for those of you who've been on the Town Hall series, we have been very concerned about the IRS service levels. We always acknowledge there's good men and women there trying to do the right thing, but there's a lot of things that have bogged down that system, including the continuing of issuing notices where there's a backlog of things that might be responsive to previous notices, unprocessed, returns and the like. And we believe there needs to be relief on that. And of course, one of the responses is about whether or not there's additional funding to the IRS to modernize systems, to staff differently, to get some elevation in the service levels, which is just tremendously needed. And this client confidentiality, or a taxpayer client confidentiality issue, frankly, brings back into the political debate some of the things about previous debates with the Lois Lerner issue and things of that nature that really dampened the support of Congress of the IRS. And those things are back in play now. And I think that's an unfortunate outcome for the IRS. And we have been very emphatic saying this needs to be addressed. It needs to be addressed quickly as to what happened. And foremost, the IRS system needs to be an impartial system that is really delivering for all taxpayers and the government as a whole, regardless of your political, perspective. And so that's a really important aspect that I think needs to be addressed.
Yeah, and Barry, that kind of ties back into, the next topics here, the infrastructure and tax proposals, because in these bills was an increase in funding for the IRS. So now you've got this tax leak. You've got a number of Republicans who are upset about that and saying this is going to change their view on some of the elements of the Biden infrastructure and tax proposals. But broadly, where do these things stand? Likelihood, timing, and it just seems to be becoming more bipartisan, more political at times, more partisan, I should say.
Yeah, it's very partisan. There's no question it's partisan. We knew it was going to be partisan, and we've said to everyone before that we did not think it would move very quickly, and it is not going to move very quickly. I think this continues to move later into the year. There are a lot of procedural issues in order for the any proposal to get through both houses of Congress. The majorities are very, very narrow. In fact, just this past week, there was a vote on ESG issues in the House, and the vote was 215 to 214. And the speaker actually had to vote, which normally the speaker does not vote. She broke to break the tie. And while that's not a tax proposal, that was a switch of only 4 Democrats to being concerned about some of the things that were in the proposal and voting with the Republicans, and essentially made a tie in the House. And so, tax faces that same challenge. Essentially, to get it through both the House and the Senate, it's going to be a high wire act, I think, for Speaker Pelosi and Leader Schumer. And I think, there's going to be pretty significant trade-offs that are going to have to occur. The House elections have really already started. The flipping of the House from a Democratic to Republican majority is definitely in play. And, those things, depending on where your district is, if you're a Democrat in the House, has a pretty significant notion. So I think the proposals will probably not as comprehensive as they've been talked about. I think there'll need to be some bringing that down in order to get it through the system. You'll see Congress move through fairly quickly another appropriations bill. That's important so that they can use what's called reconciliation to pass whatever moves with a 51 to 50 vote in the Senate. But even holding that majority together in the Senate is not going to be so easy. The number one question I get asked, Eric, in this area is it going to be retroactive? And then start with the specifics. I would say, first off, on the specifics, if anybody tells you exactly what they know, exactly what's going to get through the system, judge that where it comes from, because I don't think there's anyone that can predict with certainty today what's actually going to be in that if something ultimately passes. I think something will likely pass. I think it'll be in the fall, maybe early winter. And I think it will be less than what was proposed. As it relates to retroactivity, which of course from a planning perspective, people always worry about, even Secretary Yellen has, as it relates to the capital gains proposals, says, she doesn't really think that ought to be retroactive in nature. We're certainly going to be in the camp of making as many things as possible effective at the beginning of the year. If you think about capital gains and 1099s and partial years, those things get very, very complicated. Typically, you'll see some date picked in the process that will be the effective date for many of the proposals, but not like significant retroactivity in that sort of legislative environment. I should add one other thing. You mentioned the Supreme Court decision on the healthcare bill. I know a lot of practitioners have been appropriately filing protective claims for their clients for the last couple of years. Some still in the process today, depending on where those returns were 3 years ago with extensions and the like. And I think, I think that ruling pretty much makes those protective claims not necessary, because that was really that ruling was what those protective claims was generally about. So I think that's another change in that environment.
Well, Barry, just before we move into the discussion a little bit about the economy, I mean, these changes here with the PCAOB, I mean, you now really are feeling the effects of the new administration and some rather significant changes occurring here.
Yeah, and I know most of the people listening probably are not doing public company work and public company audits, and you may not pay attention to this. But let me just give it to you at a macro level. First off, it signifies, I think, a pretty significant shift in Washington as it relates to enforcement activities and oversight activities. So the pendulums usually shift when administrations change. And, in the last many changes in our government in the last 15, 20 years, those pendulums have shifted, pretty significantly. And this is another example of that. So the SEC has replaced it, technically 4. There's an interim chair, but looks like probably all 5 and members of the PCAOB. That's not how it was set up. It's sort of like the IRS discussion about the politicizing of the process. They were set up with staggered terms, and it was intended to have periodic changes of people. And people point to 4 years ago, Commissioner, SEC Chairman, I should say, Clayton, did a similar thing when the Trump administration came in. The difference there was, and I'm not justifying the difference, but the fact is that I think 4 of the 5 members of the PCAOB at that time's terms had actually expired, and they were serving just sort of until a successor was appointed. In this case, some of the people's terms had not expired. It's just sort of an inside the beltway point, but it wasn't really the intent of the Sarbanes-Oxley was to work. The more important part is that we are entering into an era in which regulation will be very intensified. That has impacts on the capital markets and has impacts on enforcement against companies themselves, against auditors and the like. And that is something the profession is going to continue to deal with as it relates to that public company audit issue.
Well, Barry, it's something we'll be talking more about. And actually in July, we have one of the Big Four CEO joining a town hall. We got a former Big Four CEO joining a town hall next week. We can talk about a little bit later. But look at this. I mean, Barry, when you look at this chart here, the speed of the reopening. I mean, I'm here in our New York City office, and New York now has waived all restrictions. And you saw the blue line here was the unemployed, and you see the huge spike, over 20 million last March and April. And right now, you look at how it's come down. The other thing that is something that we really got to take notice of is the number of job openings. And right now, it's very close. The unemployment number to job openings is 9.2 million job openings, I think. And then the chart here on the right, this is a Department of Labor chart that they've been tracking since 2000. The number of workers leaving jobs is at the highest level since they started tracking this 2 decades ago. So I've been hearing from companies that people are leaving. Is there something with my culture? Not necessarily so. It's just that there's a lot of people changing jobs because they couldn't do it over the past 15 months. So, and then the other thing is we've got an economy that's kind of like 1999 as well. Right now the forecasts are 7 to 9%. So Barry, I know you're thinking a lot about talent for the profession and just labor in general.
Well, I mean, the workforce is a big issue. I mean, clearly your clients are facing that. We all know the shortages of people in places like restaurants and the like, but virtually every service aspect of the economy. But, if you layer the profession over this, it's a very important aspect as well. It's not, I think you said it very well. And when, it's not about a particular entity. It's not about people rejecting you. It's an environmental issue. It sort of comes out of some of the mental issues, some of the uncertainties of the past 18 months, people looking for different opportunities as that blue line as that red line is increasing as far as the job openings, the demand for people, different opportunities. I'm going to try something else. Frankly, the work-life balance issues and how committed people are to the flexible work, all of those things play out. It's not an entity. It really isn't an entity. It ain't even just a profession. We're all part of this big ecosystem that's dealing with all of these human capital issues, people reevaluating how they want to work, what they want to work, if they want to work. I think those things are going to play out not immediately. They're going to play out for a while. There are going to be ramifications into society. And I think every type of entity, whether you're a very small firm, a big firm, whether you're a company, I think it's going to be one of the top 2 or 3 things that you're going to be, managing around and managing with as we move forward.
Well, Barry, one thing, we talked a lot last April, March, April, May, and what a critical time was for the trusted advisor. It's another pivotal moment here with this kind of economic growth, this type of change. So this is 2021 is going to be another defining year. And I know this is one thing that we're going to continue to talk about in 2021, PPP. But Barry, there was something?
Well, I just want to make one quick point because we've reinforced this in this trusted advisor. The ability for CPAs, particularly CPAs of small business, to really understand business model strategy and to help clients talk and think about that. you put this human capital aspect in, and it's about, where do I focus my strategy? Where do I put my emphasis? Where do I really create value so I can maximize revenues or gross margins and the like? And that chart you just had up just sort of makes that even more important, even though it's not necessarily a sweet spot for some people.
Absolutely. So, well, Barry, we're going to talk a little bit about this in the section with Carrie. But when you look at this chart here, this just shows the state of forgiveness. The SBA has not released a more current data table than what you're seeing here. You've got 3.3 million forgiven, 8.3 million applications not yet received. But the big thing that is being discussed right now, and I was on a call earlier today with lenders, is this upcoming July, August timeframe when the first wave of PPP loans, those loans that went out in April of 2020, are going to start coming due. If you haven't applied for forgiveness, the bank's going to have to start requiring principal and interest payments. So this is something that is going to put more and more pressure on the system. The SBA is talking about simplifying forgiveness. We need to get those IFRs out. But come July, there's going to be a lot of talk about these 2 million applications and what the lenders need to do related to these principal and interest payments.
Yeah, it's, on many of these programs, you and I both, Eric, have talked about to firms. This is not, you don't have to help your clients go immediately to forgiveness. There were some reasons not to. In fact, later in this program, we'll still talk about the interface with the RTC, which is still very much an important aspect to consider. But we told members and firms, you can focus on other things for your clients than forgiveness. Well, now we're shifting into a period where we need to be thinking about forgiveness. And, clearly, if we got some guidance on sort of an en masse forgiveness process from the SBA, or simplified, as they're saying, that would be great. And it certainly needs to be done timely. Right.
And the thing is, what Barry, we all know as we'll move to the next section, but deadlines do help. And I think the one thing that we're just concerned about is procrastination with the businesses. If you put hard deadlines out and we know what the rules are, we know this is the final forgiveness forms, then we can work on the common approach with the lenders and get it done. So Barry, thanks. We'll be bringing you back for the open forum and even some reflections on this in a little bit. So with that, I want to bring Tom Hood up and Jen Riley. And I think you all know Tom Hood. If you haven't heard, Tom's now been with the AICPA since the start of the year. He's the EVP of Business Growth and Engagement, and one of the most engaging people I know. So, Tom, I'll let you take it away from here.
All right, Eric, thank you. It's an honor to bring on a member and colleague, Jennifer Riley. And I'm going to give you a quick bio of her. Jen, say hi to everybody, by the way.
Hello, good afternoon, all.
So Jen is a CPA and CGMA. She's the Vice President, Chief Financial Officer of Enterprise Digital and TFS Technology and Client Services for TIAA. It so happens that my wife, who's a teacher, many of you might know TIAA, she happens to be a participant in the TIAA plan. So, and what I think is really interesting about Jen, I'm going to read the rest of her bio here in a second, but TIAA is a $1.3 trillion asset under management, not-for-profit structure. So it's an interesting thing. She's actually a not-for-profit CFO, and we had some great conversations about that. So she's an experienced CFO and Chief Operating Officer with a demonstrated history of working in public and private sectors, primarily financial services and real estate. She's currently the CFO of the Enterprise Digital, as we just said, at TIAA Financial Services, and she's a strong finance and business professional skilled in helping companies significantly grow and expand their market presence, complex product and pricing offer, and has dealt with significant challenges around how to fund growth through volatile economic environments. And boy, we just finished one of those big ones, right? She's North Carolina CPA and a CGMA, and she serves as an advisory board of directors for 3 external organizations. She's married to James Riley. They have 2 daughters, Elise and Brielle. She enjoys spending time with her family, traveling, fitness, and exercise, and focusing on efforts that make a difference in her community. And we're excited to have you here today, Jen. So let's get
Thanks so much, Tom.
Let's get into a
Pleasure to
couple.
be here.
It's awesome to have you. So a couple quick questions. First gets to the big one, right? Which is, how has COVID impacted your company and your role as a CFO?
Great question, Tom. So I'll start with my company. We've definitely become more digitally enabled and nimble during this time period. We also had to respond to regulatory requirements in line with the stimulus package. And I'm proud to say that we were one of the first in the market with many of these provisions that were related to retirement plans. Bringing things a little bit closer to home, I've actually had 2 different jobs at TIAA during the pandemic. My first role is I was the CFO of our retirement business, which is the largest US-based 403B retirement business and record keeper. And a year ago, I was actually tapped on the shoulder to take on my current position, and you described it well. I'm the CFO for our enterprise digital and our largest business client services and technology function. And I think when I think about the pandemic and I think about the velocity of change, Tom, that was already exponential before the pandemic relative to both the technology advancement and consumer demand, that has only become more heightened and accelerated. And from a leadership perspective, I've found that having a future vision, communication, and operating in a transparent way are the 3 most important aspects of leading through change. And when I think back to the beginning of the pandemic, there was significant demand on leaders in that we were leading through an unprecedented global pandemic and had to balance several unknowns while focusing on employee wellness and meeting the needs of our clients and their outcomes. For my team, we found new norms with more frequent team meetings, less formal video chats, and virtual happy hours. And through these new ways to engage, we shared more real-time information and were able to move more quickly into action as a result. We will take some of these norms back into the new environment, which Eric touched on earlier. It's definitely going to be more of a hybrid environment. And I think the pandemic has proven that people can really get their jobs done from any location. But the level of dialogue that we had through these more frequent and different interactions really helped people stay more connected, provided a greater level of transparency around both our challenges and opportunities. And as I always say, times of transition certainly create a lot of opportunity, and I encourage associates to look for those opportunities with an eye towards the overall future trajectory that we're headed.
So that's awesome. So I want to know, everybody talks about this accelerating. You talked a little bit about these trends, but did things really accelerate in your mind relative to your job and how TIAA was dealing with things through COVID?
Yes, I think they did. And I think, many organizations, like we just talked about, they are bringing employees back in a hybrid manner. And I think that's going to be a challenge because consumer expectations around streamlined customer experiences and real-time delivery are particularly elevated at the same time. But if you can keep your employees really happy, then hopefully you can keep your customers really happy at the same time. And I do think this will challenge nearly every industry and organization on the planet. And Jamie Dimon said it well when he was recently quoted saying that he's investing significantly in technology, but he can't invest enough in technology and its capabilities. And the small fintechs are certainly a significant threat across multiple sectors. I think it's certainly an interesting time to be in finance and technology. And the real value, from my opinion, will come from both of these organizations coming together to bring more real-time information to business leaders to respond in a more proactive and predictive way.
So we've been talking about that for a while, right? This is whole idea of getting into that windshield view and away from the rear view mirror. Let me ask you this question, because we as we've been surveying, we get a lot of folks saying they're feeling role stretch. In other words, the pandemic forced CFOs like you into this always on automatic forecasting every day, trying to figure out all the variables and what's it mean to your future business. And in many cases, the statutory, the compliance, keeping the numbers right was hard because you were trying to keep looking ahead. And you felt like you were getting pulled in those two big directions. And sometimes your team wasn't fully ready to come up there with you. Did you experience anything like that through this?
Absolutely. I mean, we've actually already been on a transformation journey relative to our CFO team and to really move that function to a much more strategic position where we're working alongside our business leaders and our business area CEOs to help drive and inform their strategy with more of these kind of real-time frameworks. And we have to leverage technology to be able to do that. But the need for this type of approach is going to continue to accelerate.
Yeah.
And the profession really needs broader strategic thinkers, which I think the CGMA arm has really helped enable and bolster further, that can look beyond the obvious and help guide the business to where to invest the next dollar and ensure that they're kind of making traction relative to their long-term strategy. And it does require very different skills than when I entered the workforce and kind of how I grew up for the first part of my career, if you will. The finance function was much more transactional in nature. And the transactional aspects, to your point, Tom, are either being outsourced or automated through robotics and other solutions. But there are new and different skills that add so much more value to the organization and add so much more value to each employee individually that's going through this transformation.
So tell me a little bit about it. So what kind of skills are you doing and how are you guys dealing with that in your finance team?
Yeah, so for me, I really focus on having a long-term vision for my team but executing on it in very short sprints, so 90 days or less. And this makes us much more swift and nimble to be able to adapt and adjust as both the competitive environment continues to challenge us and as our business evolves. So to drive the function to really a more strategic level, it requires us to engage with our business partners differently. And it requires us to really influence where the business partners are spending their time, because that's a valuable asset and resource for the company. And many times the business is focused on the wrong things and not necessarily where they can drive and add the most value to the P&L. And whether you're a for-profit organization or a not-for-profit organization, you're not for loss, right? So the P&L is really important either way. And I know you and I had a long conversation about that, Tom, and we are very like-minded in that. So I think it's a very exciting time to be in finance and accounting, and we have such an opportunity to make our function even more relevant than it is today.
Well, you basically laid out a playbook here, by the way, for everyone who was paying attention, taking notes. But two things stick out. One is the notion of value partnering. I mean, that's one of the things we've been talking about at CGMA, but you're obviously living that, and that is that notion that you're like right there, co-pilot with the CEOs of those business units and the big company, trying to navigate this very, very uncertain future, right? Tell me more about what are those skills that really make you good at that, or that you're trying to emphasize in your team?
I think it's really about learning the business in and out, really understanding what the challenges and opportunities are, and having enough know-how to opine on things that are very outside of the finance domain. And if you have that broad perspective and you're able to really understand how the business works, you can help line up those drivers with the value, the economic value that the company provides, and really have, a much greater impact than the historical function, in my opinion.
And then how important is collaboration?
Extremely important. It's very important to collaborate, to foster deep relationships and maintain those relationships, to really understand kind of what the goals and objectives are of the organization that you're supporting. But a big part of my role is to balance that with the overall objectives of TIAA and make sure we're getting really good alignment with both as we move forward with strategic execution.
Now, any tips on how you've been leading your team that you want to share with everyone? Because we're all in this boat together, and we're looking for any wisdom that we can get. What's really worked well for you, as you've talked about this notion of 90 days and kind of these sprints and things. How do you keep their mindset open to change and transformation? Any of those tips you could share with us?
Absolutely. I think it's about, really helping people understand what's in it for them, in addition to what's in it for the broader team and the company, and helping them understand how they're going to personally grow and evolve and add more bullets to their resume as a result of going through this process. I'm really big on culture, and I do a lot of informal skip level meetings and check-ins to really get a feel for the team and how people are really doing. And, typically I'll start out with, how are you doing? And I get an answer and I'm like, no. How are you really doing? And really trying to get down to the root of what can we be doing better to make you as happy as possible while you're working? Because this is where you're spending the majority of your time. So those are just some of the things that I continue to leverage that have been proven and have really worked out well, especially in the current environment.
Awesome. Jennifer, this has been a great, like I said, this has been a playbook for everyone out there. And thank you so much for spending some time with us and sharing your story today. Eric, we're going back to you.
Hey, we've got one. Why don't we just bring this next slide up? Because maybe a closing comment, Tom, from you. I think Jen just actually did a good job describing what this mindset's all about.
Yeah, she really was spot on. I think what we've learned, Eric, as we've been going through this, and I would refer everyone out there, there's an amazing white paper called Finance Transformation, the Human Perspective. It's by the AICPA CIMA, and they co-authored it with KPMG. It has all this, we've been surveying this across every speech that we've done. And here's what we're finding, right? This idea of tool set, mindset, skill set. We tend to focus on the tool, plug the new technology, and it's going to immediately help us. We miss the fact that if we don't have the mindsets and the skill sets right, we don't get those benefits. And the research that we're seeing, right? 39% of finance transformation success has to do with mindset, according to that survey. And we're finding it everywhere we go. And then 24% is skill sets, but not just skill sets, the things that Jen was talking about, skills that are aligning to the future business needs is what you have to focus. And we'll talk a little bit more about what we're doing with the CGMA around that. And then so that's 63% of your success in those two categories. Add in strong leadership, which is 17%, and you've got 80% success rate. So that's your kind of magic formula for transformation, if you will. And I love this quote by Mike Walsh: if you automate, you must elevate the skills of your team. Any final thoughts on that, Jen? And then we'll kick it back to you, Eric.
Yeah, absolutely. This really resonates. And, one of the things that I love to do when I'm trying to drive transformational change is identify key leaders throughout the organization at various levels to help drive that change, because one leader and one person can't do it alone. You really have to identify a transformation team and really help them understand what's in it for them, what's in it for the company, and really what the unmanaged outcome is. What if we don't do this? And I think once you get that transformation team together and you have their mindsets and their skill sets aligned, it really helps bring others along through the process.
Awesome.
That was fantastic. One thing, Tom, that I'd like to say, and you and I have talked a lot about this, technology is the great equalizer. What this slide highlights, if you're in a 10-person firm, it's relevant. If you're in a top 100 firm, it's relevant. If you're a CFO in a small and mid-sized company, it's relevant. If you're the CFO of TIAA, it's relevant. So this is exciting. Well said. Jen and Tom, we look forward to having you back during the open forum session. So thank you. So I'd like to bring Carrie Hipsack up. You all know her. She's part of the firm services section at the AICPA TCPS, and she's been working tirelessly over the last 17 months. So let's get right into it, Carrie. Welcome. And we got 5 different programs we're going to do a fast update on.
Yes, perfect. Thank you, Eric, for the introduction. I am ecstatic to be back with everyone while Lisa is out. As Eric mentioned, I'll be taking a high-level look at the business relief programs and the latest news available. So let's get started with PPP forgiveness. This first slide might look a little familiar, but I included it as an important reminder for firms as clients may be making their way into your inboxes and voicemails asking for help with the PPP forgiveness process. Here we have the AICPA services matrix, which includes the details about the services CPAs can provide for clients during the forgiveness process. And within this document, we have a number of links to valuable information, including independence guidance and sample engagement letters. Now, I understand it can be easy to want to jump right back into work, but as a reminder, engagement letters should be obtained before any work begins to protect your firm. Next, I'm happy to introduce a new AICPA PPP forgiveness tool. And this is a documentation checklist that you'll see on the screen. The resource begins by corralling some of that important basic information that will be necessary for the forgiveness application. The resource then breaks down all the eligible use of fund categories and document examples, and also summarizes the documentation retention requirements for each of the forgiveness applications. So it'll show the 3508, 3508EZ, and last but not least, the 3508S. Off to the right, the X marks the spot for if there is a requirement to submit or maintain the documentation described in these first few columns. On the next slide.
But just Carrie, before you get there, I mean, there's a lot of questions coming in on PPP. We're probably in the upcoming town halls, we'll do, more about PPP forgiveness. And one thing that some of the questions coming in are, they're somewhat lender specific. My lender's not taking a PPP2, the PPP2, 2021 PPP application forgiveness yet. And these are things that you have to work out lender by lender. Yes, I am aware of lenders that are processing PPP forgiveness applications for a 2021 loan. So that is occurring, and they all should be taking those shortly. And all of the lenders really do want to drive forgiveness for those loans that were provided back in April and May of last year. And then there's going to be some lenders out there, there's some lenders that are maybe not in business anymore, and how do you get those loans forgiven? And the SBA is thinking about those types of things. So once again, we can't answer all those questions, but I just wanted to address a few of those from a high level standpoint. So here you are on to the next slide.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Eric. And I know you and Barry mentioned the number of outstanding forgiveness applications as well. So we will keep you all aware of any and all new guidance or information that comes out. So then on this next slide, I'm moving into some tax and employee retention credit updates and reminders of a few unanswered questions. Before I completely shift away from PPP forgiveness, one of the unanswered questions is, what is the tax treatment of a forgiven loan? We see numerous questions coming in about the timing and impact on basis, but we currently have no definitive guidance, so stay tuned for that. And now I'm going to go ahead and shift gears into ERC, where we also have a few unanswered questions regarding wages paid to S-Corp owners and their actively employed spouses being eligible for ERC, and if forgiven PPP loans are included in gross receipts when determining that ERC eligibility. A number of these questions come in every town hall, and unfortunately, again, there's no guidance that has been released to directly address these. However, at the bottom of the slide, I want to draw your attention to the AICPA tax section, which does have an ERC resource hub, and the link is included here. And if you haven't already, consider bookmarking the site for future reference. I'd also like to especially highlight the recent Tax Section Odyssey podcast with Ed Carl and April Walker, and they are discussing challenges with contingency fees and the ERC. So if you have not yet had a chance to listen to this, there is the link for you.
And one thing that we realized the important, and Carrie mentioned this, the important interplay between PPP and ERC, and there is, questions related to this, the below 150,000, the simplified forgiveness forms that allow you today just to note payroll. That is a discussion that's occurring at the SBA to update those forms so you can have more than just payroll noted. Anything else that you want to add on that, Carrie?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head there. We are talking with the SBA, and we're trying to emphasize the importance of having an opportunity to put more than just the payroll costs on that 3508S, so that entities are able to take advantage of more than PPP, but also ERC for their wages.
So we highlighted this, the RRF program. There's the funding's halted, but there's only $1 billion left that hasn't been distributed, Carrie.
Yes, as you can see on the slide, the majority of funds have been distributed. 1.1 million remains, and approximately 100,000 applicants did receive that funding already. However, Eric mentioned it earlier with Barry, you may be aware of a recent lawsuit which called into question the legality of the priority period. So we are staying tuned with that. But if you have a client that did receive RRF funding, we do have AICPA resources available, including a spreadsheet to help track those eligible expenses. And moving on to the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant, SVOG for short. Funding for this program seems to be moving a bit slower than RRF, as we see that a significant amount of applications are submitted or in review, but only 411 have been funded so far.
Yeah, and I think when you look at all these programs, it's good to always sometimes you keep the high level perspective as you're talking to your clients, maybe leveraging some of these slides and talk about, what happened with business relief over 2020 and 2021. You see the Shuttered Venue Grant, it's 4 or 5 months in, and it's going out at a very slow rate. Now we've got other issues related to RRF. In July, we're thinking of having an SBA and Treasury official join us, former Treasury and SBA officials join us to kind of talk a little bit more broadly about what has happened over the past 16 or 17 months. We still have one other program that is getting some increased visibility from the SBA, the EIDL program.
Yes, so last but certainly not least, we're going to circle back to one of the original SBA programs, which is the Economic Injury Disaster Loan, which most of us know as EIDL. Yesterday, the SBA held a press release with updates on the program and news about SBA's outreach for applicants to take advantage of the remaining funding. I really want to emphasize that this is specifically for a loan. There was previously an EIDL Advance program that was a grant and did not need to be repaid. However, all of the funding for the Advance program has been exhausted, and all that remains is the loan. However, if you have clients that need a bit of cash infusion to weather the remnants of the storm, this may be an option. But then again, this will need to be repaid. So we do have a few AICPA resources that help provide a summary of EIDL, and you can see those links here if you want to dive in to a little bit more information about the EIDL.
Thanks, Carrie. And one thing, just even with the ERC and even with EIDL and future SBA loans, we're going to continue to work on programs and training and capabilities for the firms related to these, because we do think ERC and EIDL and other SBA loans will play a role as we finish off 2021. And clearly, we're going to continue to be very, very active related to PPP forgiveness, in particular as we enter into July. So with that, I'd like to bring the group back up. Thanks, Carrie. That was an excellent review. And as you said, Lisa's off with a well-deserved vacation week. So I don't know if she's listening today, but hopefully she's having a good week of R&R. So to kick things off here, Tom, I'm going to hand it back to you to set up a question for Barry on this overall MA strategy that the AICPA has been working so hard at.
Yeah, we're pretty excited about this, right? We've taken what was the entire CGMA credential, which is still happening, but more for like the mid-level and entry-level management accounting folks. But we've chunked it out and put it in this T-shaped professional framework. So what we're trying to say is kind of that early stuff, which is the deep technical stuff that we have, we added across at what we call boundary crossing skills. And just look at those categories: strategic management, risk management, business performance, value management, project and people, all the things you heard Jen talk about that we all have to do. Those are the new skills that we have to really start getting good at now. And we're making those available in kind of modules that you can get badges, certificates on, and you could continue to go all the way up to the CGMA if you don't already have it. But anyhow, that's where we're going. And Barry, what do you think? Because we've really just started to get this and begin to bring it to the market now.
Yeah, Tom, I think I think it's important for people in public practice who are on the town hall as well to see this in their light as we talk about this. So clearly, Jen did a great job talking about transformation and leading change, culture, et cetera. And what you're going to find, obviously TIAA is a big company. You're going to find small enterprises that have to go through this transformation. And that's going to sort of relate back to the CPA firm in many instances, as opposed to the internal capacity inside that small and medium-sized enterprise. And what this does is that firms always say to me, how do I get my staffs, or if I am a staff person, how do I get these broader set of skills that are so important to where business is going, which is obviously the client of the firm or the employer for the member in business and industry. And I think that's really what this is. By breaking it up, people can take just the pieces that are important to their segment and really move it forward. And the other thing that I think is really important, we're a profession that has embraced continuing education since the 70s. But what we really are is in an era here of competency redefinition. And, the notion of continuing education and a deep dive in some of the technical areas, yeah, we need some of that, and some people in our firms need that. But where the businesses are going, the quote about if you're implementing technology, and Jen commented she thought it was right on as well. If you're implementing technology, you have to upskill your people. Well, that's really what we're talking about. The middle career people in this profession, no matter where they are, is how do we upskill them for what's going to be expected into the future? And with the speed of change, that future is a lot closer than it used to be. And I think that that's a really important part.
Yeah, I think that, this whole thing is about the skills that we're going to need. As that survey said, we have to align our skills today for where the business is going fast now, right? And that's exactly what Jen's talking about. And that's, to your point, Barry, that is a lot of those we call boundary crossing skills, because in fact, you're being a value partner. You're working across boundaries. Even if it's a small company, you're sitting there in the front seat with the CEO, or if it's a big company, you're working with multiple CEOs of divisions, I think, like that. Jen, any comments on any of that?
Absolutely. I think, Barry, you hit the nail on the head there. And Tom, you further reiterated. I do think that coming out of the pandemic, there's going to be a lot of disruption. And it doesn't really matter what the size of the company is or the industry or market that it dominates. And if I just think about the restaurant industry, that's been, a common theme and topic of today. It's been fascinating for me to see the restaurants that have been able to figure out new ways to delight and serve their customers through the pandemic. And I saw a very well-run catering company migrate their entire model and move to at-home delivery, chef-prepared meals that were really meeting their customers where they were. And similarly, I've seen restaurants that have been table stakes in the Charlotte community unfortunately shut down because they could not meet the customer where they were and where their needs were. So I think it's really important for finance professionals to have a more blended and broader scope. And I think having a mix of roles that are both broad and very niche sets people up really well for that type of skill set.
And I think if you're in a small firm, you have to play that role for so many of your clients, just as Jen just described. And that's when we talk about business models. She just described that, a shift of business models for one that survived and one that didn't. And it's so important for us to get those competencies in the profession, because that's really the trusted advisor role in a nutshell. And I think that's critical.
Barry, well said. And we know what has happened with the pandemic and going virtual was that firms now, it's related to client accounting services. That's a must-have service line. And we've been talking to Tom more and more about the convergence of what's happening in the client accounting services area in a firm of all sizes and what's happening in the finance function in corporations. So there's a lot in that last slide that you can leverage if you're in a firm. Barry, we got a lot of questions here, so we'll jump into open forum. And I'm going to start off with one that just came about when we were having that discussion about the accelerating the economy, and this is related to inflation, and how should firms think about their pricing strategies related to what's happening in the broader market?
Well, I would say it's value-based is the primary driver, right? We need to think about different pricing strategies. As a professional organization, we can't, suggest specific strategies, specific amounts, because, you're independent organizations. But I think the notion of thinking about the value proposition, just like that restaurant example, the pricing probably shifted when they started delivering chef-cooked meals to home. And what we're delivering right now is incredibly valuable to businesses, and businesses face huge decisions, and we're those trusted advisors. And we're seeing a lot of firms that are experimenting with different kind of subscription-based pricing, almost zero time type accumulation pricings. And we really need to think about it in a much different way. And the relationship that you've built in this past 15 months, it really gives you an opportunity to have that type of conversation with a client, because the story you bring to the table about the value is very, very clear. And it's probably the greatest opportunity most people will have for a long time to be having that conversation now.
Well, Barry, I don't know if you listened to the session with Ron Baker, but that was very much in line with what he said on this is an opportunity to move to a subscription pricing model. The question was more, raising prices. And I think you really think about this, there's a thing about it more broadly, as Barry just said, than just saying, take this opportunity to make sure you're moving to a value-based pricing strategy. I
think the inflation most of the economists is telling us that inflation that's on the horizon is, really in a transit period. It's not a permanent type of environment, although the Fed is talking a little differently. But for instance, there's a lot out that the lumber bubble is burst, and that they're starting to come down. And so, I think I think there is an opportunity for some of that, clearly. But I don't think I would base it solely on the fact that, we're now into a sustained period of inflation. I think most of the economists are saying that it's more transitory as far as what we're facing.
Thanks, Barry. And just there's been a couple of comments. Just this week is live. Last week, actually, we made a strategic decision because our broadcast platform, one of the largest broadcast platforms in the U.S., they were having some system issues. So we decided just to do a recorded one. Because we did not want to have any system problems with you. But it is great. We love doing live shows, and this is a live show. So, Carrie, question for you. They appreciated a little bit of the idle talk and the idle of PPP. There's some kind of confusion with some questions coming back on, converting idle to PPP. Do you want to kind of just give people a quick refresher on the interconnection there?
Yes. So there was an opportunity to refinance the idle loan into PPP. So if you had a loan taken out within certain dates, you could choose to refinance that into PPP, which would then be forgiven. However, that is no longer available, and it was only available with first draw PPP loans. So if someone has an outstanding idle loan now and they want to refinance that into a PPP, unfortunately, that's not an option.
Thanks, Carrie. Question to you, Tom. Some people are, talking about, the return to work and having, firm retreats, firm meetings. You do a lot of that. What are you seeing as 2021 evolves?
I think, the first thing is you don't say return to work, because then they say, you think I wasn't working for the last year and a half? So change your word to return to the office, I think, would be a better one. But I think a lot of the firms we're seeing, and the research is saying it's going to be a hybrid world. I think you heard Jen talk about that. And it looks like it's, 2 to 3 days in, 2 to 3 days, some mixture of that. We're hearing many firms say they're going to try to do, and this is true for finance as well, all the things we've surveyed there. But I think they're also looking at like high impact collaborative meetings and things. You're going to schedule people in for those. and then try to respect the, the boundaries of people that might still be afraid of coming in or worried about the virus. But there's all kinds of implications. One of the top things the CFOs are telling us is the idea of, big issue about maintaining a good culture in a hybrid world. Everyone's trying to figure that out. And then the well-being of the team. Like, this has been a rough journey. I mean, Barry, you've talked about that a lot. It's been rough, right? It's been a marathon, and you've got to worry about that as well.
Well, Tom, a few people have asked for the white paper name again. We'll put that out. We always follow up these town halls with our newsletter. We'll get that in the newsletter. But Tom, do you just want to give people the name of the white paper?
Finance Transformation: The Human Perspective. It's by AICPA, CIMA, and KPMG. By the way, if whoever wants, if they go onto LinkedIn and follow the hashtag CGMA, I want you to blow that up. I'll post it there tonight, so you'll have it ready to go. So follow that hashtag and get the word out that we're here and we're talking about this stuff.
Great, and we'll put it in the follow-up newsletter. Jen, is there anything you want to add? More about heading back into the office here in New York? It is. I walk in the streets. The return to work is I shouldn't use the word return to the office. It's happening in a major way, and we actually had a fireworks show on Tuesday with all restrictions being removed from the New York State area.
That's great to hear. Things are starting to normalize for us here at TIAA as well. We're going to have a staggered approach for people returning back into the office, very similar to what you described, Tom, with a hybrid flex mode. That's what we're calling it. And we are going to make it voluntary in the fall, and then look towards, more of a formal program as we head into 2022. But many of us, smaller teams are kind of getting together and have plans to kind of get together as people are comfortable.
Thanks, Jen. Barry, anything you want to add? I mean, one thing we did talk about on the last town hall was the results-oriented, focus. Firms have always been results and outcome-oriented. So. And we were hybrid before, so in some ways, this is probably one of the things that is accelerating the economy, just more productivity.
Yeah, when we went into this, we had 4 principles inside of the AICPA and the association, and one of those was productivity, and we reminded people it was work from home. The work was the emphasis point. I do think, though, on the human capital side, back to your chart, Eric, earlier with the unemployment and the people seeking jobs, et cetera. I think the hybrid, at least, is going to be a competitive necessity for most people employing. And I think there's vulnerabilities to people who are in smaller communities that probably have had staff for a long, long time. Their options have probably increased because of this flexibility that's come about. And so how you look at it in your environment, even if you're a small firm, I think is a really important part. You're going to have to, I think, find ways to be responsive to what people are experiencing in the marketplace.
Barry, some great insight there. I think that is, and one thing you just have to accept that those types of things are going to happen, and think of strategies to manage through that. So with that, let's all 5 of us stay here, and let's just bring up the slides, and we're going to walk through some closing slides here. We've got all the recent AICPA Town Hall series here available on archive. I mean, there was over 5,000 of you who watched last week's on-demand recording. We've got over 6,000 here today live with us. Please do leverage these resources and share them with your team. We've got this slide here. These are hyperlinks. You have to download the materials, and you can click on those hyperlinks. And this is where we have additional information on all of these programs. Lots of resources that PCPS and the AICPA have put together. Carrie, I know this survey is about to close, and we'll be covering this in a future town hall. What would you like to say here?
Yes, this is our top issue survey. We typically send this out every other year. Last year was our survey year, but in light of COVID, we held off one more year, and the survey does close tomorrow. This is important because it provides us an opportunity to hear from firms what keeps them up at night, and also what they anticipate will keep them up at night for the next 5 years. The survey does close tomorrow. It takes about 10 minutes to complete. So if you could give us our feedback, it really helps with the direction of our resources. And this is beyond PPP. This is general firm practice management. Yes. So please take the survey and share all your insights with us, and we'd greatly appreciate it.
Thank you. Some upcoming learning opportunities. You can these are all clickable links, so take advantage of these programs as well. We're going to have a town hall next week, Thursday, June 24th, because we appreciate how much you enjoy these town halls, but we decided we would not have one on July 1st, right before the July 4th holiday, which we hope you enjoy. But we're looking forward to next week. And Barry, I know you know Kathy Engelbert rather well, so maybe provide some insight on what you think she'll be sharing with Sue Coffey.
Well, Kathy is the former CEO of Deloitte and now is the commissioner of the WNBA. She's fabulous. She's done a great job in many different aspects in the profession. And I'll bring it back to the pipeline point. One of the things that we have to emphasize in attracting people into the profession, and I know everybody wants the people to stay with where they are, but we've got to attract them into the profession. And the diversity of where the profession can take you is so important. And here's a prime example. Kathy led one of the largest firms in the world. And now, her passion, she played college women's basketball. Her passion is following through, and she's the commissioner of the WNBA. It's sort of an interesting story, and it shows the diversity of our profession.
Thanks, Barry. And we look forward to having Sue Coffey, who leads the public practice section of the AICPA, next week as well. So thanks, everybody. Jen Riley, thank you. Tom Hood, Carrie, Barry, great show today. Good being with all of you. Look for our follow-up emails, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Have a great weekend. Thanks for your time.
Thank you for your participation. You can now subscribe to the AICPA Town Hall series on your favorite podcast platform, as well as watch archives on YouTube and AICPA TV. Tune in for live broadcasts Thursdays at 3 p.m. Eastern Time.